said it'd been a home run 1904.
Good afternoon. Keep your seat for a second. It's so good to see you. I have two fun facts for today, and they are, can anybody tell me in 1887 what might have happened on January the 20th? It did, maybe, but it has to do with a naval base, signing a lease for a naval base. So in 1987, we signed a lease with Pearl Harbor as our naval base. So one fun fact. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, in 1982, Ozzy Osbourne had a concert on January 20th. And he did something that shocked the nation that night. Can anybody tell me what he did? He did. He bit off the head of a bat. He claims he thought it was a toy. But needless to say, what a change in history on the same day in the over 100 years apart. I am happy to see you all, each of you. Glad you're joining us. If you are guests, please consider to join us again. Make us your community and join our community of volunteering. And we're happy to see everybody online, and we hope that you can join us someday soon. It is a great day to be a Kiwanian. Kids need Kiwanis, and Kiwanis needs you. So thank you for what you do in our community every day. If we can all stand and say our defining statement. Kiwanis is a global organization of volunteers dedicated to improving the world, one child, one community at a time. And we also want to welcome our newest member today. Leslie, we're so glad you are here. Now we will say our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clay, I didn't hear what song we're singing today, so I'm going to jump down and get a book. Will you share with us what we're doing?
We have a special treat today. Mr. Harley Mudge will lead us in song today, and it's on page 15 in the book.
One editorial comment. Were it capable of my learning a grand old proverb, I would not be here, and that is, a fish would not get himself in trouble if he learned to keep his mouth shut. If you will, page 15, America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains, majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you. I think, Harley, you've led us twice in a month. What's going on? You've led us in song twice this month. Are you getting in trouble back there? Okay, so it's the duo. All right, Frances, will you share our invocation with us today?
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, so many times we become immersed in daily troubles and hardships. Help us to see beyond these small problems and instead work toward making our community a happier and healthier place for all. Please guide us in our efforts this day and the days to follow. And now bless this food to our use and us to your service. Amen.
Thank you, Frances. Buck, will you introduce our guest, and then we'll do the membership welfare?
I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the person that has a guest with them to introduce the guest today. How about Hugh? You got a microphone back there?
I got a mic.
Hugh Grist.
I've got Lucy Grice with us here again today. That's my mom.
And we're certainly glad to have you. Thank you so much. Lynn, you got a guest today? Or Lynn, are you the guest today? Lynn is the guest today.
Okay, Lynn Ginsner, a good friend of mine.
Thank you for bringing her. And I'll introduce this person. Sterling is with the state of North Carolina, with NC State University, that is state of North Carolina, and he's here with Dr. Bonanno, who's going to speak to us today. He's in the Extension Service. Meredith Little, you have a guest.
Hi, I have Cece Pitts here with me today. She's a friend of mine. She's originally from Charlottesville, but moved all over the place, putting down roots in Raleigh, and asked me where she could volunteer. So that's why she's here.
We appreciate you. You came to the right place to volunteer, okay? And Leslie Stanley has a guest today. She probably has two guests, and don't anybody come over here with a application, because I've already got an application to this little one, okay? Maybe a year or two before it comes on board.
So I brought my husband. This is Michael Stanley. We've known each other for a little bit now, and he works for Staples. And this little one is our newest member. Her name is Cecilia Grace. She was born December 27th. And she's using her fingers now, so she's learning. That's her new thing.
Welcome, we appreciate it. I think we're going to have some birthdays on the board in just a minute. Be sure to take a look at that. Is Randy Hartley here today? Randy is doing much better, and he's going to undergo surgery real soon for the removal of a mass in his side. So please keep him in your thoughts and prayers. David Williams is not here today. His brother-in-law died this week, and we want to extend our condolences to him. And also Gary Pendleton is not here today. His brother died this week, so please remember Gary in your thoughts and prayers. Are there any other announcements that we need?
I just wanted to let everybody know, I talked with Martha Ripard a couple of days ago, and she's doing well and hopes to get back soon. But she had a massive heart attack in December, had a couple of stents put in. So I just wanted to let you all know, because I was not aware of that. So, but she's doing good. She misses everyone.
Thank you, Courtney. And so for all of those who had a happy birthday over the last week. And we look forward to watching Cecilia grow up in our club. We have a few announcements. Greeters. I think we have greeters for next week. Correct me if I'm mistaken. Phil Kirk, I think, agree. But if there's anybody willing to greet with Phil Kirk, please raise your hand for next week. Okay, I'll do it. Okay, so Phil and I will greet next week. I always want to remind you, check your weekly email. There's lots of good information in there, and it also gives you a little bit about our speaker. Serving food dinner at the Salvation Army. We do that on the 4th Friday of the month. We are looking for volunteers. January is covered, but we're looking for volunteers for the 4th Friday in February, which is February the 24th. If anyone is interested in doing that and wants to raise your hand, I'll jot your name down. No one has signed up at the moment for February 24th. Okay, catch me afterwards if you want to add. And then I want you to save the date for Charter Night, which is 4/28. Alice, do you want to share anything about Charter Night? Just save the date. Okay. And on February the 3rd, 2 weeks from today, we need someone to carry the food left over from our lunch to the Salvation Army. Is there anyone willing to do that on February the 3rd? If you'll raise your hand, that would be fantastic. Elle, thank you for doing that, Elle. And then we also have another date to save, and that's for our annual baseball game. We'll be going to the Durham Bulls for our spring social. That is June 22nd. So stay tuned for more information, and we hope you can attend. Good to see everybody here today. I see some faces I hadn't seen in a while, so I'm happy to have you here. And with no further ado, I'll ask Buck to come introduce our speaker today.
Well, thank you, Stacy. We're proud to have a faculty member from NC State today, and you'll probably see a couple of faculty members or people that are in charge of various aspects at NC State that will affect your lives. And I tried to add some of those into the programs during the year, and I think you will enjoy this today. Our speaker today is Dr. Richard Bonanno, who's the Assistant Dean for the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. He is also the Director of the North Carolina Extension Service and has just recently been named the Vice Provost for Outreach at NC State. The North Carolina Extension Service extends research-based knowledge to all North Carolinians, helping them transform science into everyday solutions. Let me tell you, as one that I grew up on the farm, as one who grew up on a farm, I know how important the Extension Service is. My dad, as a cotton farmer, talked to the county agent at least once a week, and he was on our farm once a week. My mother was really involved in what was called the home demonstration clubs back then, teaching people how to can and how to keep house and to do things that were very important. And I must say that I used to have a stutter and be afraid to stand in front of people, but because I was in 4-H club and was put in the leadership class at 4-H and the public speaking class at 4-H, I got rid of that problem, and I have made most of my living doing some type of speaking. So the Extension Service means a lot to my family. Dr. Bonanno joined NC State in 1980s as the associate professor in the Department of Horticulture, and his focus was on the management of weeds in fruit crops and vegetables. I managed some weeds in the cotton industry by chopping them, so we hope you have an easier way to do it. He left NC State in 1989. He returned to Massachusetts, and he managed the family fruit and vegetable and flower farm at that time, a farm that has been in his family since 1910, and I believe your daughter runs it now. Is that correct? Agriculture is a part of his life. He served as president of many societies, including the Massachusetts Farm Bureau Federation, the Northeastern Weed Science Society, the New England Vegetable and Berry Growers Association, and he is on the American Farm Bureau Federation's Board of Directors. He rejoined state in 2016, and I'm proud to introduce someone who is involved in the agriculture community, which is so important to all of North Carolina, Dr. Rich Bonanno.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Be happy to know I will not be eating a head off of a bat in front of you today, even though it apparently is a tradition for January 20th. And the other thing, when we sang the song, I was thinking, you know, stuff always goes through your head when you're doing different things. And one of my daughters, not the one that runs the farm, but one of my daughters went to the Air Force Academy. And so we would go out for Parents' Weekend on Labor Day, and we took the Cog Railway that goes up to Pikes Peak. I don't know if any of you have been on that Cog Railway. It goes up to the top, and there's a point there where you're above the tree line. You haven't hit just the bare rock yet. You're kind of in that tundra area. And they said on the train that was the spot where America the Beautiful was written. That as you sat on the side of Pikes Peak looking east across Colorado, you had that purple mountain majesty and, of course, the amber waves of grain as you looked out into the Great Plains out in front of you. So just those are the things that were going through my head as we started this session today. So it is a pleasure to be here and tell you a little bit of what is going on in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at NC State, and a little bit of what's going on around the state. And so I want to do it. I know I don't have a lot of time here, and I want to give you kind of a little preamble that leads up to kind of where we're at. So, you know, NC State is what's known as a land-grant university. And the definition of a land-grant university is as a university that was created. These are called land grants from a law that was passed in 1862 called the Morrill Act. And the Morrill Act was designed as a way to create the opportunity for people to go to college, members of the public, non-elitists. Because there were many private universities at that time, going back to the Harvards and so forth, but they weren't for the regular people. They weren't for people to go to think about kind of everyday living and everyday needs that were out there. So in 1862, when the Morrill Act was passed, there were 3 public universities in this country. Anybody want to guess who they were? 1862, there were 3. UNC Chapel Hill was one of them, yes? University of Georgia was the other one. Another one more. No, well, Chapel Hill is the University of North Carolina. So UNC Chapel Hill, Georgia, William and Mary were the three public universities in this country when the Morrill Act was passed. So the goal was to create universities where anybody could go, the public could go, learn about agriculture and the mechanical arts. That's why you see places like Texas A&M, agriculture, the mechanical arts, okay? So that's where the universities came from. And originally, their mission was teaching the public, teaching people to be able to do better in their lives. As that went on, research, developing new knowledge became a part of this, because now remember, we're in the Industrial Revolution, people are moving off the farms. You go to that time, farmers only had to produce enough food for themselves and one other family. So as time went by, Industrial Revolution is happening, people are moving off the farms and moving to cities. Farmers need to grow more and more food per farm. And that requires technology. So research started to be developed. And that research that was developed was used to teach the kids that came to college. And so those kids that actually came to college and majored in agriculture, regardless of which of those land-grant universities they were in around the country. The one I went to was Cornell. I got my bachelor's and master's at Cornell, which is the land-grant in New York, even though it's also an Ivy League and partially a private university, and my PhD at Oregon State on the West Coast, all land-grants. The only people that really benefited from that research were the people that were going to school there. So if you happen to have a son or a daughter going to NC State back in the late 1800s, and they were learning about some of the research and the new knowledge that was being generated on campus, you got to bring that home to your farm, but it really didn't go much further than that. And as time went on, now we're getting, when the Constitution was signed, 85% of the people in this country were farmers. Okay, in 1920, it was still 40% of the people living in this country were farmers. Now it's 1.8, 1.7% of the population is farmers. So you think about number of farmers, the number of people, how many more mouths to feed. And so in the early 1900s, there became a real need to make sure that this research that was being developed on these campuses wasn't just staying on campus or with those lucky few students that happen to be bringing it home to their families. So that's where extension came in. It started in a couple of different parts of the country. It started in the Midwest a little bit. It started in New York. It started on the Gulf Coast. And one of the people that's considered one of the fathers of extension goes back to the Gulf Coast and boll weevil and cotton, since we mentioned cotton. A big problem. Didn't have a lot of artificial fabrics back then. And you needed cotton, and you needed silk, and you needed hemp if you wanted to be clothed. So there was a need to take some of this technology and get it out to farmers. And that was really the beginning of the extension system, was how do we get research-based information that are developed at our agricultural universities out to the farmers to make sure that they can follow along with the technology and do a better job. The interesting thing, since you're all about youth here, and most people know what 4-H is, 4-H initially had a big role in this because farmers were very unwilling back at that time to adopt technology. And so the idea was that if we can get children in our schools to learn this technology, they'll go home and talk about it around the dinner table. And so going back to the early 1900s, so extension officially started with a passage of something called the Smith-Lever Act in 1914. But 4-H was in the area around the country 10 years before that. There were things called corn clubs and tomato clubs. And tomato clubs were more about food safety, food preservation, kind of a part of what was home ec at that time, and teaching about canning and all of food preservation. And the corn clubs were about teaching technology, new varieties of corn that were being developed. The idea of thinking about corn having a need for nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and other nutrients to get it to grow. And if you fed these crops more than just water or what you might get from manure from raising animals, you could increase yields. So in the schools, they had these gardens, and they had the kids learn, and a lot of them were from farms, of course, learn about the production of corn and other crops, and they would take that technology back to their families. And so 4-H and the youth of this country are very, very instrumental in helping get that technology back out to the farms. And so that was really the beginning of the extension system. And so the extension system, as a result, as it was developed, had three main components to it, just from one general standpoint, and that included and continues to be 4-H, which is youth development, citizenship, leadership, STEM education. Some of it happens in clubs, livestock clubs and so forth, but also some of it happens in schools with 4-H curricula that are now in schools, and people learn about embryology and animals and chickens and eggs hatching, and also about insects and biology of animals and plants as well. So the 4-H component is still very, very strong, and 4-H continues to be the largest youth outreach organization in North Carolina. In addition to that, part of Extension is what's called Family Consumer Sciences, often referred to as FCS. And what Family Consumer Sciences is kind of what in the old days was sort of home ec. But with a big focus of FCS now is on food and nutrition programs, and also food safety. And a lot of the curricula is really geared towards people in this country that receive assistance, SNAP, food stamps, WIC, Women's, Infants, and Children, other programs that go to the public and people that are in need, that are food insecure. And the goal of a part of our Family Consumer Sciences programs is to teach people about food and nutrition, and try to get them to think about providing healthier meals for their families. On limited budgets, it's easy to run through the dollar menu at McDonald's and bring things home already prepared. And the goal is try to get people to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. So there's school components of FCS that happen in the classroom. There are also components that happen with the public. A lot of people that receive food stamps have the ability to enroll in classes to learn more about food and nutrition. And FCS has some other components as well, including some parenting, family financial management. There's a component on housing, just about safety around the home, food safety that's a part of that. Also, something gets, we have a flood, we have a hurricane, what happens with your home, mold, all of those things are all part of the curricula or FCS. But the largest component of what we do in Extension is really about agriculture. And it's across all of agriculture. It could be an insect problem in arugula, or it could be a hoof health problem in a goat or a sheep. So it's really across all of it. And in order for that to happen, it takes a really robust university agriculture program to make that work. So the way we're structured, so first I'll tell you a little bit about campus and then about what happens on the counties. Our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at NC State encompasses 12 departments. And those departments collectively, we have 320 faculty in our college, and many more people that are technicians and do other support work in our college, but 320 faculty. The way those faculty is split up, now each faculty member might have sort of multiple responsibilities, and those responsibilities can be teaching, which is undergraduates and graduate students, research, the development of new knowledge, extension, being subject matter experts out to the state for the people that we then have working in the counties in North Carolina. So from a standpoint of effort, about half of our effort in the college, a lot of people would say, oh, it's got to be teaching, but it isn't. Half of our effort is research, the development of new knowledge. We are a big R1 research university, and we are one of that core group of universities around the country, especially in agriculture, that are developing the new technology to move agriculture forward. And we can talk about that a little bit if we have time. 25% of our effort is in teaching, and 25% of our effort is in extension. So out of the 320 faculty at our college, half of them have some of their appointment as extension. So it's spread over 162 of those 320 faculty. It could be a 20% extension appointment. It could be a 100% extension appointment. We have a lot of faculty that have about a 70 or an 80% extension appointment. And so what does that mean? So a lot of people that have an extension appointment as part of their job, and a lot of them are split between extension and research. So they're always developing new knowledge, and at the same time, they're the purveyors of that knowledge around the state. But to make that work, because we've got 50,000 farmers out there, spread over 100 counties, plus the Eastern Band of Cherokee, we've got the people off campus. So we have about 850 people that work in the counties of North Carolina. We have an office in all 100 counties, plus the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And each one of those offices has a staff that averages around 8 people. And it includes 1 or 2 people that focus on agriculture. It could be livestock, it could be field crops, it could be horticulture, could even be home horticulture, deals more with consumers. You find more of that as you get more to suburban and more urban counties. There's somebody that does family consumer sciences. There's at least 1 4-H agent, and there's administrative staff that also work in those offices. Wake County, as an example, has the most people of any of our county extension offices. They have 32 people in the county extension office, 17 of which do 4-H. And most of them are 100% county paid. So we have a formula that we work out with the counties on how our funding works, and I'll tell you a little bit about our funding at this point and then connect it back into the counties. So we receive money. Extension is a very intentional thing. In other colleges or other universities that don't have a land grant system and don't have extension, there are faculty that aspire to connect with the public. But it's not really part of their job. They connect with students. They do research, but oftentimes the amount of time and effort they can spend in maybe working with the public is limited because it's not what we pay them to do. Whereas at extension, it's part of people's jobs. If you're in the counties, you're 100% extension. If you're on campus in our college, like I said, you could be anywhere from 20 to 100%. So there is within the USDA budget, within NIFA, which is the Institute of Food and Agriculture, one of NIFA's main roles is they are the main funding agency for the land grant universities. So the USDA has about $100 billion budget. Most of that, 85% of that, is food and nutrition programs, food stamps, women's, infants, and children, those types of programs. NIFA's got about a $2 billion budget, and that $2 billion budget is pretty much spread from both what we call a formula funding standpoint and a competitive funding standpoint out to all of the agricultural universities around the country. And that includes the 1862s, which are in every state, plus also the 1890s that were then created, and they're mostly historically black colleges and universities in the South. So not only every state has one, but 18 states kind of in the South, Oklahoma, east of Florida, up to Maryland, have an 1890. Ours is North Carolina A&T State University, which is in Greensboro. They are an 1890 land grant. They're also part of the system, and at the county level, we work together. So there is a line item at the federal government with USDA for extension, for example. There's a formula that splits it out among all the states. Believe it or not, we get the second highest amount in the country, behind Texas. And there's all this big, huge formula no one ever wants to talk about. But it has everything from like the number of farms, the size of farms, the amount of food you produce and all that. But one very important criteria in the distribution of that money is the percent of a population in a state that lives in rural communities. Texas is number 1. We are number 2, okay? In fact, just a year ago, we officially flipped from more than 50% rural to now just under 50% rural, as opposed to suburban and urban. So we benefit from this federal money. This federal money is also then matched with state money that comes out of the General Assembly. We have a direct line item that comes directly to our college for extension and for research for that matter. And then the counties also put in money. So those 850 people out in the counties, on average, counties are paying 54% of their salaries. There's 101 different buildings that we're housed in. The counties own 99 of those 101 buildings. One is actually owned by the commissioner. of Agriculture, and the other one is owned by NC State University itself down in Morehead City in Carteret County. The rest are all public county buildings. So the counties are paying half the salaries of the people out in those county offices. They're providing the infrastructure, the utilities, the lights. Oftentimes they're supplying support for, copying. They provide vehicles for 4-H and for other people to go out and to do work. The county investment is incredibly large in the state. And that's one of the things that makes it great. In South Carolina, there is exactly $0 from the counties on county agents. They don't support the county agents. In Massachusetts, we don't even have counties anymore. They only exist for the purpose of the registrar of deeds and the sheriff. There are no county extension offices, and so every state is different. And I tell people all the time here, we're really blessed that we've got such a robust system. We've got a very, very strong agriculture. Remember, still the largest industry in the state when you figure in all the processing and everything that goes on, pushing $95+ billion. The second industry in the state is military. Military, about 60 billion. Everything else falls below that, even though we think we're, a lot of other things going on. Agriculture is really huge and continues to be huge in the state. And so the resources that come in are really magnificent. So, so we've got federal money, we've got state money, we've got county money. In addition to that, we bring in grants and contracts. We have work that we do, funding that comes from commodity groups like the Christmas tree growers or the cotton growers or the soybean growers or the tomato growers or the apple growers, all the way to people that are philanthropic, and they might be funding scholarships for 4-H students to be able to go to college, or other programs. Sterling, that was introduced earlier, works for Extension, and he is part of our advancement office, our fundraising office within our college. So we've got a very, very robust fundraising. I'm going to give you some really, really quick figures here, just so you kind of know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about my budget. Last year, my expenditures in Extension were $133.5 million. Okay, that was the total Extension effort in this state. The amount of money coming in from the federal government is around 12 million. There's a little bit more on top of that for some of the SNAP Ed and the nutrition funding. The state of North Carolina is giving us in the vicinity of about $40 million, a little bit more than that. Counties are giving us 25 to 30 million, depending on the year and what else is happening, but a huge amount of salary money. And then we've got about $33 million that is a combination of endowments, philanthropic giving, grants and contracts, sometimes the services we charge for, so there's receipts associated with that. So it's a very big program and a very big arm of our college. We also have a little bit in the College of Natural Resources, which is the forestry college at NC State. A couple of those departments that we work with, where we have people in Extension, are some of the wood products, parks and recreation, and also just the growing of trees, and that includes Christmas trees. And as you probably know, we're the #2 Christmas tree producer in the country. Ashe County is the #2 county in the country producing Christmas trees, behind Clackamas County, Oregon, which is #1. So we, like I said, we work in the different areas: ag, 4-H, FCS. We're part of a college that also has 3 missions: teaching, research, and extension. And maybe the last kind of major piece about this that I'll tell you is that extension is really it's a two-way street, and it's very grassroots oriented. So the aspiration is always to figure out what the needs are, what's happening, what does a county have from a production problem. Of course, multiple counties could have the same problem, and then the agents are working with, in this case for agriculture, with the producers. They're giving them information from the university, but at the same time figuring out what the problems are, getting those needs back up to campus so that we can do research and solve those problems. We may have something on the shelf, we may have to develop a new set of research to solve a problem, and then we get that research back out to the consumers. Just a quick example of kind of what's a big thing that's happening right now in North Carolina. You know that we are the #1 producer of sweet potatoes in the country. We produce over 60% of the country's sweet potatoes here in North Carolina. And if you eat a sweet potato in Europe, there is a 60% chance that it was grown in North Carolina. So it is a big, I mean, it is a big, big industry. The biggest thing facing that industry right now is a little nematode, not a frog, but a little nematode, which is a little microscopic worm called the guava root knot nematode that has invaded our country from where else? China. And now we're dealing with it. And it's an invasive nematode that infects the roots of the sweet potatoes and makes them unsaleable. And because it is an invasive insect, you cannot ship that insect out of state. Okay? So it impacts our shipment to all over the country because we're producing 60% of the sweet potatoes. It impacts our ability to ship to Europe. We're looking at a program recently with the Department of Agriculture thinking about, so when you harvest sweet potatoes, you harvest them dirty, okay? You harvest them still dirty in the field. You put them in these big, huge rooms that are bigger than this. You raise the temperature, you get the skins to set, and once those skins set and you keep that temperature correct and the humidity correct, you keep those sweet potatoes for 2 years. But as soon as you take those sweet potatoes out of the bins and wash them and pack them, you got 3 weeks before you got to eat them. Okay, and imagine what that means when you put them on a ship and you send them to Europe, and think about supply chains and the ships that you've seen hanging out in the ocean, you know, loaded with shipping containers and all of those things that can happen and go wrong. So one of the aspirations was, okay, want to increase the market for North Carolina growers. Let's ship dirty sweet potatoes to Moldova. Let's get them out in the Black Sea. Let's get them to Moldova, develop an industry there. They can then take the dirty sweet potatoes, wash them and pack them, and then they've got time to ship them among all those Eastern European countries. Well, aside from everything else that's going on in the Black Sea right now, that has kind of, you know, slowed this whole process down, we can't ship dirty sweet potatoes to Moldova because they might have guava root knot nematode in the soil or in the sweet potatoes. So this is a huge effort right now to try to solve the guava root knot nematode. It involves soil sampling and testing and finding out which fields may have it. And then how do you select those fields? How do you make sure that you're not moving the nematode from a field that doesn't have it to, that has it to one that doesn't have it? What about the harvesting practices? What about, the harvest, the washing and the packing, and what happens on the packing lines, and developing AI technology to see the guava root knot nematode so it can be kicked off the packing line, so maybe it just goes to canned sweet potatoes and it doesn't go into the fresh market. So just huge millions and millions of dollars. Right now we're working on a $10 million grant, $5 million from USDA and $5 million from the General Assembly to try to deal with this guava root knot problem that we have in sweet potatoes, because it is a huge industry in the state, impacts a lot of producers, and it's a really significant crop with us. You know, those sandy soils, even though it's grown in about 30 counties or so, those sandy soils in the coastal plain, you know, not the Tidewater area going way out, and not the Piedmont where it's hard to get a carrot to grow straight in the clay. When you get into those sandy soils in the coastal plain, you can grow the heck out of sweet potatoes. Okay, we got the right climate. It's a very long crop. You know, you gotta start the plants. You can't even go to the field till June, and then it takes 120 days before you can harvest those sweet potatoes. You don't do that. You don't do that in Maine. You don't do that in Minnesota. Okay, and but you can do the heck out of it in North Carolina. And so it's a really big crop and a big industry. And really the role of the land grants, the role of these agricultural colleges is to really help these industries. And, you know, sometimes people argue, they say, well, why are we doing that? Why are we spending this taxpayer money? We don't help any other industry like that. Well, you know, food's kind of important. You know, I always tell people it's number 3, right? Air, water, food, you know. I didn't say cell phones or, you know, automobiles. It's a pretty important thing. And you know, we have fewer farmers, less farmland all the time, okay? I want to build a house. I want 2 acres. You know, I want this, I want that. Lots of people, population growth, right? We're at what, 360? We're supposed to top out at maybe 500 million in this country. You know, we're going to 10 billion people nationally. There's a lot more mouths to feed and less farmland. And so how do you do it? You got to develop technology. You got to do it. You got to make it work. And so that's part of what we do, and extension is incredibly important to get that knowledge out. So that's what I do for a living. So I'm very happy to be here and share it. Anybody have a question? Yes.
A couple of days ago, I drove from Hinesville, Georgia to Abbeville, South Carolina, and that's angling from the coast all the way up towards Spartanburg. And there was an awful lot of pine plantations, but there were also acres and acres of fields that, best I could tell, were lying fallow. And they didn't look like there was a hay crop, didn't look like it was last year's cotton or soybeans. What do we got to do to get more land in production when we're facing urban growth and the loss of farmland?
So there's not a lot of land that's out of production, so I'm not sure what may have been a situation there. I would say that in general, most of our fields are in production now. There's some crazy things out there that have to do, sometimes you hear about farmers being paid not to plant and that kind of stuff. And sometimes that comes with when there's overabundance of something, which there has been in the past, and the government's saying, take your land that's not your best land and leave it fallow for a couple of years to get the supply down, because, especially with the big crops, the government tries to make sure farmers stay in business. So they've created these floors for pricing. And if the price of corn or the price of soybean drops below that floor, they try to make it back up to the floor. If there's way too much production in a given year, and I would say we've had that problem in the past, where there's too much production, you have a really, really good year. It rained in the Midwest. We didn't have a hurricane in North Carolina, and all of a sudden there's way too much corn and the bins are all filled, and now the price drops. So the government's in a quandary about how many of those people are we going to pay because the price dropped versus giving them a little bit of money maybe to keep a few fields out of production next year. And that's what some of that comes down to. But the cost of production right now is incredibly difficult. Supply chain and also the cost of inputs is really, really high. We happen to have one of the best sweet potato crops last year and this year that we've ever had, and the price has dropped below the price of production. And that's a problem, because you're in a world market. But I mean, I agree with you. We don't want to see that land fallow, but sometimes there's extenuating circumstances that come into those decisions.
Other questions?
Why are the sweet, when I shop at Whole Foods, why are the sweet potatoes from South America and not from North Carolina?
That's a good question. So, and I don't know. Whole Foods has an aspiration they try to sell more organic if they can, okay? And that isn't always available in places where you have to pay a lot of money for labor. So sometimes you grow organic things in places where you don't pay for labor. And in some of those countries, they pay per day what we pay per hour here. And sweet potatoes is a very high labor crop, because you have to grow the transplants, you have to cut the transplants, you have to transplant them, and then they have to be harvested by hand. You can't harvest sweet potatoes with the big machines like you can harvest Irish potatoes. So they get flipped over, and every one of those potatoes is picked up by hand. And so to grow in an organic situation where you don't have all the control, so weeds, insects, and diseases, which means your yields are going to be low anyways, because you're going to have crop that you can't control a pest on, and you certainly don't have the ability to control weeds. It's all done by hand. Sometimes they go to places where they can buy the product cheap enough, and that's part of that conversation.
I have a question. Yes.
Hey, so my
Usually-
question was about in Duplin and Sampson County, where I had read a statistic once that 2% of all the protein in the world comes out of Sampson and Duplin counties. So I would be curious to know what Extension's involvement, like with those, the factory farms. So we have friends who grow turkeys and we have friends that are in pork production, but they work for these big corporations. So does Extension get involved? Like, what is Extension's
Okay.
involvement in that
So-
mile-long hog processing place?
I'll give you the real short version of what we could talk about for the rest of the day, okay? So first of all, like, I don't use the word factory farm because every one of those farms is a family that is raising animals, okay? No, I know, I understand, okay? So everybody raising hogs or chickens or turkeys in North Carolina is a family that might have brought their kids back onto the farm. And yes, they contract with a company which gets that, kind of designation of industrial agriculture or family farm. But remember, it's no different than Green Giant or Del Monte that are shipping, they're selling you green beans and corn. Those farmers are the same. They're individual farmers growing corn and green beans for Green Giant. They contract with the company, and then they sell their product to that company because those farmers don't have a big packing plant that they can then process that so that you as a consumer in this country can go into any supermarket you want. And guess what? You can find chicken. And you can find pork chops, and you can find green beans, and you can find corn, you can find all those things. That's the industrial part. That's the quote-unquote factory part. Someone putting 3 chicken houses to bring their kids back into the business and raising 75,000 chickens every 12 weeks. This state raises 1 billion chickens a year, because there's a lot of mouths to feed in this country. But the factory industrial part that sometimes you hear people complain about is about what happens above the farm. And it's what guarantees that your food is always there in the supermarket. And so, there is a piece to that. And so do we work with them? Yes. We work with the farmers, and mostly when we get into the integrators, and as the vegetable business is the same when we talk about the Green Giants and the Doles, they do a lot of things internally. Okay, and they have their own systems about when to plant, when to harvest. Same with the animals. So our role in there, from an extension standpoint, part of it is the development of new research. Think about now, people want their eggs cage free. That just doesn't happen, even though the public thinks it happens like that. Somebody's going to develop that technology. We've been involved in that along with the companies. How do you get chickens to get out of the cages and lay eggs, that they're clean and all of these things happen so that eggs aren't too expensive, but they're getting to be more expensive because of all of this. So we're involved with that. The other big place we're involved with the animal industry is in waste management. So what happens with all of that waste? How can we use it in agriculture? How can we make sure it doesn't get into the ecosystem? So we have a lot of faculty, a lot of our agents are focused on how do you handle chicken manure? How do you handle pig manure? How do you handle cow manure? Get it out, use it as a nutrient base in our cropping systems. But we could talk about this for forever, but that's kind of the short version of that. Okay, one more here.
Yeah, years ago, maybe decades now, tobacco was the money crop in North Carolina, bar none. Where does it stack up now in the scheme of things?
So when I was here in the 80s, I remember the day it became the #2 crop, and it became #2 to turkeys. I remember turkey ended up, I can't remember what year it was, mid-80s, turkeys ended up 19% and tobacco ended up 18%. So in the old days, everybody raised tobacco, right? You had a tobacco lobby at 25 acres and there was, 300,000 acres of tobacco in the state or whatever that number was. That number is way down. Competition, Brazil, China, other countries. A lot of the tobacco we grow goes to China for a lot of people that still smoke overseas. Our industry has dropped. I can't remember the exact acreage of tobacco. It is down, but it's still in that 100,000 acre plus range, but there's fewer people producing it because, again, going back to the sweet potato question, labor is incredibly expensive. If you want to be legal right now in North Carolina, you will pay your H-2A workers $16 an hour, plus their transportation from their home country, plus housing, plus all the immigration paperwork. So you're looking at $22, $23 an hour for labor. And so we try to be more mechanized to make things work, and the tobacco industry is like that. So you don't have individual people with 20, 25 acres of tobacco anymore. You can pay the mortgage and send your kids to college. That industry has changed as well.
So we have several people that raise their hand in questions. Would you be willing to stay?
I'm fine,
one
as long
second?
as you, I
And
don't want to cut into your time, but I'm good.
Stay with it.
I'm good for the
So
moment.
fantastic, and thank you. So we're going to ask you to sign this book. We place these in the schools. It's the step 3 reading. And so if you will sign this, and while you are signing that, Sterling asked me to ask anybody from NC State, raise your hand and come see him after the program, because he wants to get your name and address. We want to thank you. This program is very near and dear to my heart, as I grew up on, both my parents were from small farms. And I will tell you, when I was a rebellious teenager, my mother and my 4-H agent decided to send me to Pennsylvania and work on a dairy farm. So when they woke me up at dark, 3:30, to go milk cows, and then I came to have breakfast, and they said, go get the milk. And I looked in the refrigerator, they're like, no, go get it out of the bucket. You just... So anyway, I do have an appreciation, and I'm still a work in progress. So thank you. We hope that you will come back and visit us again. We would like you to see you. We also want to, would like to invite Lucy, Lynn, Sterling, Cece, Cecilia, Grace, and Michael to come be with us. We're happy you're here. It's a great community, and we want you to be a part of us. So next week, June Small will be leading us and sharing with us who the 2023 grant recipients are from the Kiwanis Foundation. With that, we are adjourned.